Meeting called and convened October the 11th, 2022. Having called the meeting to order, I'd like to ask Councilman Riley Bettis, if he would, to lead us in a Pledge of Allegiance, followed by an invocation. If you will join us by standing.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mayor, since it is my birthday, I thought I'd take the opportunity to ask for some stuff from God.
Happy birthday.
If you would, pray with me. Dear God, thank you for the blessings of a life of 68 years of exceptional faith, family, and friends. Mine has not been a perfect journey, but I've seen many more rewarding and peaceful mountaintops than I have bitter or somber valleys. Thank you for the great fortune of growing up in this place that nurtures the best in us, that teaches us to care for our fellow human beings, no matter what their lot in life, that always guides us to search for that unique solution, that one result that fulfills the needs of our community. What I pray for, Lord, is a revival of humility and compassion, and a repudiation of greed, lawlessness, and the lack of a reverence for life. A return to values that uphold our God-given freedoms that are based on your laws. Continue to guide this council in a way that fulfills your expectations, with glory to God. Amen.
Amen. And with that, Ms. Clerk, we will note that we celebrated Mr. Bettis's birthday by holding a Greer City Council meeting this evening, October the 11th, 2022. Let the record reflect. We have two people to appear in public forum this evening. This is a time we set aside for citizens to come before council to speak to issues that we will address later in the meeting. We have Aaron Williams and Perry Williams. I would ask that whoever chooses to come first to come to the podium, if you would state your name and address as a matter for the record.
She said I could go first. I'm Perry Williams, 401 West Poinsett Street. And thank you for the opportunity to voice opposition to the rezoning of the residential lot that joins our property on James Avenue. At the last meeting, your staff volunteered an example on Pelham Street of how mixed use can benefit a traditional residential neighborhood and mentioned setbacks and required screening. Someone has a photograph? Oh, I'm sorry. I get to do that myself. Not that one. This one. So this is on Pelham Street, and I went and took a look at this one, and as you can see, there is no setbacks or required screening. The setbacks and screening was never affected, apparently. Approved as a flower shop, then a boutique, and now a health spa, but no landscaping on site. You ladies and gentlemen, are the deciders here tonight. The development of this lot will never come before you again. It may or may not be an office building. With or without screening, we don't know. It is my opinion that rezoning this residential lot deep inside our neighborhood sets a dangerous precedent that threatens all neighborhoods and will negatively affect residential property values and our quality of life in Greer. So in conclusion, surrounded by multiple residential lots, this lot on James Avenue has been zoned residential for a good reason and should remain residential as it is, the highest and best use within this traditional residential neighborhood. And thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
To back it up.
Thank you for allowing me time to address City Council. I don't know if you know the history of the Williams and the James house, but we've been living there since 1991. It's a long time. We raised our 4 kids there. It's our home. We've renovated it. We're still renovating it. It was quite a big mess, but we love our city. We want to see it improve. And with that in mind, we bought a couple of lots that touch on the property in question. One is located at 212 Hubert Street. There's a house there, and then the vacant lot next to it. Our family lived there. Our 3 grandkids played in the backyard there up until about 6 months ago when they moved. Our concept was to buy that house, which we did, wait for the vacant lot to become available and purchase it, which we did, and then we were going to combine the 2 lots, tear down the house, and rebuild with a nice new home that people would like to live in. It would be a significant improvement for the homes on Hubert Street. Should this rezoning go through, this gives pause. Do we really want to put in a residence where somebody's children are going to be playing next to strangers coming in and out, traffic, which we already have heavy traffic problems. These are some examples. This is an illegally parked car going down the 2-lane street, and it's parked on the wrong side of the road, very close to the stop sign on Poinsett. This is another example of that. These pictures were taken within the past 30 days by me. I just happened to be out there and I snapped these pictures. If I had stayed out there 24 hours a day for 30 days, I bet I would have seen a lot more. This is an example of the signage that's out there, and you can see that this is James and Poinsett Street intersection. This is where it's a 2-lane road. It's a very narrow, historically small residential road. On the right is my husband's truck. That's in front of our property. On the left is the illegally parked car, who I guess she didn't care. I actually said, "Your car's illegally parked," and she very snippily said, "Well, I'm out of here." That's a quote. So like it doesn't matter. And back to the other OD office, which does not have correct screening. And that brings me to the point about the existing office owned by Osage. They have not got correct screening. It's an OD zoned house, office. It's very close to the property line next to the quadruplex of residents, and there's no screening. He has gradually, over a period of time, removed screening to the point that we can see down 3 lots. So it's a clear view of the back end of these other businesses and homes. It's not attractive. I'm just asking that you retain the beautiful neighborhood concept that's safe, relatively traffic-free. I know we'll never go back to that because we're in Greer, but please vote no. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Concludes our public forum, so we'll move to the minutes of the council meeting you have in your packet September the 27th, 2022. I'll entertain a motion that they be received.
Second.
And a second. Any items of note for the clerk? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Miss Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. We'll move to the administrator's report. Mr. Merriman.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. First of all, I want to thank you all for attending. Last week, we had our what is our annual safety breakfast, and because the city continues to grow, we have expanded the one-day event to 4 days, and part of the method to that madness is actually just to double down on our efforts to ensure that we have a safe work environment for our employees, which inevitably not only saves them from problems that may come from a workplace injury, but also saves our taxpayers a significant amount of money. I'm proud to say that we put nearly $380,000 back into return to surplus because of savings and efforts that our employees have put in. So thank you for attending that last week. I also want to point out that a partnership with Greer Police and our friends at CPW for a drug take-back day. We are inviting the public to bring back any over-the-counter prescription, pet pills, patches to CPW on Saturday, October 29th, which they will then be safely disposed of at that time. The event runs from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., and we do ask that there are no sharps or liquids brought for disposal. But again, this is a partnership between the Greer Police Department and CPW. Reminder that loose leaf collection begins, actually the season for loose leaf collection begins October 31st for City of Greer residents and runs through February 3rd of next year. I would encourage folks that are interested in how that process works to visit the city's website at cityofgreer.org for a calendar and map, so you'll know when your leaf collection date takes place. I also want to, this is a special event, I think, and I certainly want to bring it to your attention. And I want to thank Ruthie Helms in particular, who kind of got the ball rolling on this and has worked with our police department and fire department. But we are welcoming and hosting a national event, or a national organization, the Irish Angels. The Irish Angels are is a group, a kind of a grassroots effort that is designed specifically to provide assistance or means of assistance for our first responders who suffer with PTSD, addictions, mental illness, etc. This is just a fantastic opportunity for the city and the Irish Angels to continue to extend helping hands to not just our folks within our police and fire, but first responders from across the upstate will have the opportunity to learn about this national support network. So this will be held October 13th and 14th here in City Hall on the second floor. And if you have an opportunity just to kind of follow what they're doing, I would recommend doing so. So we're really excited to host this event. Also, I would also remind you to continue to look at the city's website because we've always got something going on. Peter Pan will be at the Center for the Arts between the 21st and 23rd of this month. Not the real Peter Pan, but the Children's Theater will be presenting Peter Pan. He may be there, I don't know. Also, we got the food truck rollout Thursday, October 20th, the Artisan Makers Market Saturday the 22nd, and Greer Arts and Eats has been rescheduled thanks to Ian, and it is now rescheduled for Saturday, October 29th, and that will be held largely on Trade Street, Randall Street, and Victoria Streets downtown. And the last announcement I want to make is something that's been kind of coming for a number of years now that has been a long, arduous process, but that is our code of ordinance update and rewrite. It looks like we're there, and we are hoping to have final copies provided sometime in November, with council adopting those first of the year. Is that right, Tammy? So we expect to have those on council's agenda in January. So it has been a long process, but we are finally at the end of it for y'all to consider. Mr. Mayor, council, that concludes my report.
Thank you, sir. Questions of the administrator? We appreciate it. I was amiss earlier, speaking of CPW, Mr. Perry Williams, who appeared at our public forum, is a commissioner with the Greer Commission of Public Works, and we want to thank you for the work that you do at the commission and the relationship that we have in regards to the commission. In large measure, much of what you saw tonight in terms of our growth plan is enabled by the forethought and planning of the Commission of Public Works in terms of infrastructure, which they have been able to provide for the city and take to their furthest reaches among the areas that we know we'll be able to serve, and that has served us well, and so thank you in that regard.
Mr. Mayor, if you'll pardon me, I said that concludes my report, but I was wrong. And that will make the first time in 2 years I've been wrong. And if you believe that, you're mistaken.
Your wife told me otherwise.
But speaking of that, and CPW and our growth, I want to bring something to council's attention that I think is important, especially in light of a lot of the discussion the council and decisions the council's had to make over the last few meetings in regards to growth and development. Nick is actually pulling up. I'm going to show you 3 different maps in 3 different areas, and if you'll indulge me real quick, I'll just kind of stand up and talk, if you will. Nick, I'll take it from here if I screw up, then save me. But this map here reflects the what was ultimately finished in 2017, actually, was that right, the 2017 Greer Master Plan. And so much of what was identified in this area, of course, you can see our city limits has changed substantially, but this area here has been, I wouldn't say targeted necessarily for growth, but we know that that's where the growth is going to come. So even back when this process started in 2015 and finally adopted in 2017, the city was prepared for growth to continue to occur in this area. Fast forward to the next map, which shows our future land use map, and in this particular case, the character areas, because we can't really have a future land use map of property that is outside of the city limits. Again, this area has been planned for from a growth and development standpoint to continue to see growth as a suburban neighborhood. And finally, the last map is something that our folks in planning and GIS has really worked hard to put together, but what I asked them to do is give us an idea of properties in this area that are over 10 acres in size. And that's kind of an arbitrary number, but the point of that number is really to kind of give, by way of reminder to council and certainly those folks in attendance or that may be watching as we live stream, that these parcels very well could be annexed and developed as residential properties. Council's been preparing for this for a number of years and is going to continue. Despite national economic fluctuations, I'm fairly confident, and I know that council's been fairly confident, that this growth in this particular area will continue. And with the availability of large parcels and the contiguity of some of these large parcels, it's reasonable to expect continued requests for annexation and subsequent residential development. The purpose of this slide is really just to remind council again of the work that y'all have done over the past few years in preparing for this growth with the understanding that it's going to continue. So just as the mayor mentioned with Mr. Williams in the room and our partnership with CPW, from an infrastructure standpoint and from a planning standpoint, we've done everything that's reasonably possible to prepare for this, and now it'll be just a matter of continued smart growth and employing our UDO when it's finally finished, and many of the smart growth principles that council has adopted to see this area continue to develop. Again, the purpose of this was only by way of reminder that we've been working on this. We know it's coming, and that's it. I didn't know if you wanted to engage further in this, but I think in light of what we've seen over the past few months with annexation requests, rezonings, et cetera, I think we can reasonably see more requests coming.
So just to be clear, the areas in green are incorporated into the city and the yellow areas are unincorporated at this point.
Mr. Mayor, that is correct.
So again, it does give us an idea of, we've had this discussion about continuity earlier this evening, and while some of that appears to be regular or non-contiguous in some regards, some of that is joined by, certainly a good bit of it is joined by sewer, again provided by CPW, which gives us the ability to reach what appears to be a bit of random in some regards, but also, I think one of the interesting things about this map that struck me at my first glance at it was this whole idea of density. We can see based on that area that while it is growing and while some people feel that it's overgrown to some extent, that we can expect that there's going to be a lot more growth in that area. Others?
Mr. Mayor, what are the areas that are neither yet green or yellow?
Those are simply parcels that are largely residential, larger lots, but did not meet that 10-acre threshold.
Gotcha.
Were y'all able to throw a population amount on a speculative number on what, that's like a whole nother city of Greer right there, so.
Well, and that, that's a good point, and I think that boils down to that question of density, and what's that philosophical approach to how we're gonna continue to grow in that area. So to answer your question, no, we have not applied numbers to that, but I will say that, just bare minimum, that has been planned for as suburban residential, and I think the natural progression of the growth in that area will be suburban residential and those commercial opportunities that so often frequent suburban residential development.
Now, when you say plan for, would you encompass that with like sewer? So that's a big deal, is having sewer capacity.
Yeah, the water sewer capacity it certainly exists in that area. I know that one of the questions that'll come up inevitably, of course, is, well, what about road capacity? How does that work? And sadly, it works opposite a lot of times, is the roads have to come after the population gets there. And that's just the nature of it. But we have been diligent in requiring not only those developers that are coming in to do traffic studies, make the necessary improvements to the roads as they come in, but we've also required of them annexation agreements that are providing us resources to then go in and potentially purchase property or make capital improvements in order to serve the citizens in that area.
Mr. Booker, almost that same verbiage was used, and I don't know how many years ago it was, but council was meeting and we were talking about this exact area and said if this could, at the time, there could be more population south of 85 than is in the existing city limits now. So it has been discussed.
Others? Thank you for the update, sir.
Yes, sir.
Council, with that, let's move to appointments of boards and commissions. We have the Housing Authority of Greer Commissioners has an opening. Julie Barnes' term will expire 10/31/2022. She is stepping down from that position, and so Ms. Fowler, who is the Director of the Housing Authority, is going to make a recommendation to this board in the next several meetings, so we should have that recommendation from her. Any questions in that regard? If not, then we'll move to items of old business, the first of which is the second and final reading of ordinance number 56-2022. This is an ordinance to change the zoning classification of property owned by B. Scott Streetman located on Vandevender Drive from R12 to R7.5. Ms. Cotty, any new or additional information in regards to ordinance number 56-2022?
Thank you, Mayor. I do not have any new information. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. With that, then, it comes as second reading. I'll entertain a motion to receive.
Second.
Floor is open for discussion. Questions? Comments? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Miss Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council's second item before us this evening is the final reading of ordinance number 57-2022. This is an ordinance to change the zoning classification of property owned by Chris and Judith Harris located at 166 Bellamouth Close from R20 to R15. Any new or additional information, Ms. Cotty, in regards to ordinance number 57-2022?
No, sir.
With that, council, this comes as second reading. I'll entertain a motion for the purpose of discussion.
Second.
And a second. The floor is open for discussion. Questions? Comments? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Earwood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas.
Yes.
Mr. Bettis.
Yes.
Miss Albert.
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Second and final reading of ordinance number 58-2022. This is an ordinance to change the zoning classification of property owned by Osage Capital Investments, LLC, located on James Avenue from RM1 to OD. Comes as a second reading. Any new or additional information in regards to ordinance number 58-2022? Ms. Cotty?
Yes, Mayor, at the last meeting, Councilmember Bettis asked for a potential site plan. Again, this would be tentative and just a conceptual layout of what could be, as we do not require site plans as part of rezoning unless they're a DRD. So as a reminder, this is a rezoning request from residential multifamily to OD office district. This is an aerial view of the site. Again, it's on James Avenue off of Poinsett. This is the current zoning map. The red that you see is C2 commercial. The purplish blue color on your screen is OD office district. The peach color is R12 single family residential, and then the darker kind of taupe color, as the site currently is RM1 residential multifamily. The future land use map calls for traditional neighborhood. And then this is a current street view of the site. It is the vacant parcel behind the parking lot that you see. So this is a conceptual layout that was prepared by David Langley, an architect, laying out with the required setbacks in the office district for both front, side, rear, as well as required parking that would be allowed. And so I did meet with the applicant and review this with him and concur with this site plan. And this is, again, very tentative. They're not required, and this is not Planning Advisory Committee, but just to show you what that building may look like with additional parking as well. So with the existing office and then the new office space, they are currently overparked. So they would be required to put in a few additional new spaces, again, to the side of the building. And again, this shows that it can meet the setbacks in office district. I will point out that any new development will have to comply with the ordinance, both setbacks, screening, all requirements. This project would be required to go through Planning Advisory Committee, have a full civil plan review, and then building permit review as well. When staff referenced the Pelham Street Flower Shop, that was really in reference to a special exception that came before our Board of Zoning Appeals earlier this year that many of you were CC'd and brought in on. We had over 30 people from the neighborhood come out and support to allow for accessory retail in that location. It is not a good example of what actually would be on a site. That was an old laundromat that was in existence for over a decade, and it is considered legally non-conforming and grandfathered in. So I just did want to point that out, that my example was for the use of small-scale neighborhood serving retail and not necessarily the structure and the site, because it certainly does not meet setbacks, screening requirements for parking, or screening against other uses. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and I do believe the applicant is here as well.
Thank you, ma'am. Given new information from staff, I'll entertain a motion for the purpose of discussion, ordinance number 58-2022.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Floor is open for discussion.
Thank you for pointing out about the screening. And if you go back to the example that you were using that showed what could be used in a residential setting, that laundromat It was there many, 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 many years ago. I do support this. I support in traditional neighborhoods, businesses that support and provide or meet a demand of that neighborhood. If we go back and look at in our older communities, there's several examples of restaurants. You have the Back Home Cafe, Cannon's Restaurant. In the Victor community, there is store buildings. There used to be more of them. The laundromat on that we just discussed was one, and then it's transitioned. And I think if it's done correctly and on a case-by-case basis, it doesn't detract from the neighborhood, the community that it actually adds to.
Others, questions, comments, discussion?
I did ride by another time on James, and I did see two big vehicles, one black truck and one, I tell you, well, I don't know if it's an SUV or not. I did notice the big black truck, which really obstructs traffic there, because when I was going out, someone else was coming in, and it made it kind of, they of course had to wait till I got by, because they were on the side where the cars were. But anyway, it is very dangerous there having cars parked out on the street. But I did notice in the parking lot, there were several empty spaces. Now, I don't know why they would park, I don't know whose cars they were, whether they were at the business or whether they were the Williams, I really don't know. But if they were there for the business, I know there were quite a few empty parking spaces that they could have taken up. Of course, I don't know how long they plan to stay there. Maybe they were there for 5 minutes. I don't know. They were just there when I went by. And it made it very hard to get by.
And that's an issue we have in downtown, and Mr. Merriman will.
Well,
concede
if you
this.
got a 2-lane road, you know, and narrow like these little city streets are, there should not be anyone parking on that side of the street. Maybe they need to put up no parking signs. Maybe we need to put up no parking signs on that street. You know?
It's just like saying that a road's not wide enough and there's gonna be a wreck because people speed. That's not the caused by development. It's caused by people breaking the law.
Right. Yeah, and that's what I said. There was parking places there that
Yes,
they could have,
that's
if
right.
they were visiting that business, that they could have parked in. And whether they intended to run in and drop a piece of paper off, I have no idea on that either.
It's
I just
like
know
the
they
beer
were there.
trucks. It's like the beer trucks stopping in the middle of Trade Street and shutting traffic down while they're delivering. That happens every day.
Not a good idea.
No, it's not.
I have a few, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, in regards to ordinance number 58-2022.
Okay. No, I just had a few questions. Now, you mentioned, and this is kind of on a side note, that staff doesn't have the ability to ask for a site plan. In our new UDO, are we going to give that level of discretion to staff or the administrator? Because I know sites get a little more complicated, a lot more challenging. Available land that is good is, maybe beforehand, we might want to entertain having some level of discretion to say, well, this site looks kind of sketchy. You're going to have to give us something a little more than, yes, you can make it work.
Yeah, I mean, staff does, if they have concerns about size or anything, we do pass along those concerns, but our decision is whether or not that zoning district is appropriate on the given location. So it's never been a requirement to provide a site plan, and I think that would really hamper business. A lot of people are prospective. They're buying it to then sell. Most people do their due diligence and make sure they can do what they want to do before they go through the expense and the time to go through this type of process. Again, we do advise when we see potential red flags. But I don't foresee that being a requirement in the UDO. I mean, certainly that's something council can discuss during the draft.
I definitely think it's worth the discussion, because we get more and more, well, on the professional side, we get more and more sites where people are investing a little more time and care in planning out these sites on the front end. And I think if they're going through that expense, it's worth to share that with the legislative bodies. But I do want to thank Chris for reaching out to me, and I'm not against development, and I'm not against necessarily what he's trying to do here. It's just, I don't necessarily like to fit a square peg in a round hole in some regards. And, you know, that's all perspective here. But are there any, if this does go through tonight, is there any kind of particular overlays that he'll have to go? I mean, I don't have the overlay map. Is there?
It depends, possibly. So there is an overlay along Poinsett. It depends whether they would like to combine the property or if they'll be developing it separately. So there is potential that there would be an overlay that's along the properties on Poinsett. That would have higher architectural requirements and landscaping as well.
Okay.
But it just depends whether or not they're going to combine the property. They could do that. In this case, I'm not sure whether or not they're planning to. You could have that applicant address it if you'd like.
Well, I can't really tell on the size of the building. Is there? I can't read out that square footage. Was it? Can you read that out? Is it 1,600? Or?
I believe it was close to 1,600 square feet,
Okay.
and then closer to the 1,200 range for leasable office. And again, this is very preliminary, just to lay out to show you what could go there.
Yeah, I noticed they have a survey here, so they should be able to get it pretty exact. Again, thank you, Chris, and like I said, you know, appreciate everything you're doing in the city, and regardless how this goes tonight, definitely in support of all the work you're doing.
Others?
Certainly, there seems to be an enforcement issue at the very least for parking that we ought to be able to do something about one way or the other. Jay, I think as you said it, you know, that's just a result of people breaking the law as much as it is development in and of itself.
Questions? Comments? Discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Duncan.
Mr. Earwood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
No.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas, Mr. Bettis,
No.
Miss Albert,
No.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, let's move to items of new business, the first of which is the funding approval for the pilot Watershed Study. Engineering Department will join us for that conversation. Mr. Rue will lead us in that discussion.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for giving me the opportunity to present to you tonight. With me this evening, also have our consultant team from WK Dixon. I've got Earl Bingham, Michael Cameron, and Brian Thomas with us, and Lisa Wells as well. So we've been working with them the past 2.5 years, building and planning for our comprehensive strategic asset management program for the city, specifically for our stormwater program. Tonight we'll be seeking funding for our pilot watershed study. But before we get on to the scope of that project, I want to discuss all of our planning efforts and all the work we've done to get to this point. So what is asset management? Asset management provides a long-term management strategy for city staff to manage our assets at the lowest life cycle cost while meeting all of our expected level of service criteria. So in other words, it's just getting the best bang for your buck in maintaining all of our city assets. So when we say assets, we mean city buildings, fleet, roads, storm drain, pavement, signs, all city infrastructure. Specifically tonight, we're talking about our stormwater, storm drain infrastructure. So our ultimate goal is to be more proactive with our maintenance projects instead of reactive, addressing issues as they arise day to day. So 3 years ago, when we had the bright idea of implementing asset management into our stormwater program, we thought we simply needed to purchase asset management software and hire a couple technicians and go out there, start cameraing and inspecting storm drain. But when we finally got the ball rolling and with our planning efforts with WK Dixon, we realized we needed to take a step back and do a lot more planning to get ready. So what did we do to get there? We first started with GIS data management was phase one of all these efforts. So we converted our existing stormwater storm drain data into a GIS format so it could be implemented into an asset management software. And this was completed in August of 2021. Then our second phase was developing a strategic asset management plan to aid in capital improvement planning for all of our stormwater projects, and this set the foundation for our program. And then our next steps is where we're at now, which is conducting watershed studies, implementing our new software system, which y'all approved previously, which is Cartograph, currently in implementation phases right now. And then final pieces is developing a stormwater capital improvement project list. So to delve into our phase one GIS data management efforts a little more, our first steps were looking at our storm drain data and the mapping that we had on hand and figuring out where we wanted to go with it. So we had a storm drain map with overlapping lines, erroneous information, and a lot of data we needed to clean up. Historically, we've used this map as a starting point when issues have arisen in the field. It's not 100% accurate, but it was a good starting point. And we then defined how we needed to edit this data and how we could get it implemented into Cartograph. So that involved revamping our digital submission requirements. Historically, we've only required site engineers to submit their final CAD files, their CAD line work for new development in DWG format with simple lines, no structures or other information or data. So we developed a GIS schema or format that we now require for this data that engineers must follow and submit with their as-built submittals. So with this phase, we also converted all of our existing data. WK Dixon took our data and converted it into this new format. So we now have new layers defined for BMPs, detention structures, inlets, manholes, open channels, outfalls, and pipes. So instead of just lines on a map, we now have assets, unique assets and structures. And now this data can easily be implemented into Cartograph and allow for the historical record keeping we need. So instead of those basic lines, we now have unique assets in Cartograph, which will allow inspections, pictures, all maintenance records to be attached and recorded and kept forever, basically, in the database. So instead of relying on employee knowledge, we'll now have all this data digitally, which can be recalled at a later date in the future as we need it. So under our phase two efforts, once we wrapped up our GIS data maintenance work, we moved on to setting the framework of our stormwater asset management program, and we called this phase our gap analysis. So what we did there was work with WK Dixon and other city departments. We held 5 workshops to discuss level of service criteria, operations and maintenance, business strategies, funding strategies, asset criticality development, and then our final strategic asset management plan. So all these workshops set the foundation for our stormwater asset management program. We looked at systems and service policies, our operations and maintenance strategies, analyzed potential funding opportunities, and looked toward the future with capital improvement project planning. So all these discussions and decisions defined the overall goals of the program and how we needed and wanted to prioritize everything. So all these planning efforts culminated into our, what we called our criticality analysis. So as part of all this work, we delineated watersheds in the city and analyzed all these watersheds based on risk factors. These risk factors centered around likelihood of failure, and consequences of failure for the stormwater assets in the watershed. So likelihood of failure is defined by things like pipe material, age of the infrastructure, and known problem areas or known history of the assets. And then consequence of failure is defined mainly by location, such as vicinity to roads, railways, floodplain, critical facilities such as hospitals or city buildings, and other socioeconomic impacts. So just to put that into normal layman's terms, a 10-foot box culvert underneath a road that leads to a hospital is going to be a lot more critical, have a lot more consequence than, say, a 12-inch pipe in a little 5-lot subdivision underneath a 100-foot road. So all those factors were weighed and analyzed on all these watersheds you see on the map here. And based on this analysis, we ranked all these watersheds and were able to see our most critical watersheds. So the red shapes here are the 5 most critical or highest priority watersheds. And this is no surprise, the 4 of the 5 you see there are in the heart of downtown, which is where our oldest infrastructure is and our most consequential infrastructure. So the most critical watershed in the city was defined as this branch of Maple Creek, which runs just north of Wade Hampton, through Century Park, through the south end of downtown, and all the way to Highway 101. So this is what we define as our pilot watershed. So we got all that planning completed, all our data edited, and where we want to go set up. So where do we go now with this pilot watershed? We got to nail down a scope on how we want to tackle it and move forward. So with W.K. Dixon, we planned this pilot watershed project with the following scope items in a 12-month project duration. So we got initial data collection, public outreach efforts, stormwater inventory and condition assessment, post-survey desktop analysis, hydrologic and hydraulic modeling, final watershed master plan, and then critical project conceptual design. So that's the scope of the project, and from here I'd like to hand it over to Earl with W.K. Dixon to discuss the finer details of the project and some similar projects they've conducted in other areas.
Thanks, Robert. All right, thank you, Mayor and Council. So my name is Earl Bingham. I'm a project engineer with W.K. Dixon. I'm in our Columbia office. Several other folks here from our Greenville office. Just in discussing the details of this pilot watershed study, I wanted to go through who we are as consultants, why do this study, why take this approach, and then what are you getting from it, what's coming out of it. So who we are, we're in the Southeast. We have a dedicated group throughout our offices that are focused on stormwater, on watershed, on stream restoration. And we've been doing this for a number of years. As you can see here, we've done numerous projects across South Carolina and North Carolina, both on the analysis side and the planning efforts, similar to this, as well as in design and overseeing construction. And we've also been able to secure significant funding from state and federal sources to back that in many different types of communities. Some examples of some communities that we've worked with of various sizes kind of throughout the region. I've personally been involved with about half of these. And these are all, cities of different sizes. They have different challenges, but going through the process of planning, prioritizing your assets, planning and prioritizing projects, and then seeing those through design and construction has been a successful approach in these communities. So that's kind of the who, a little bit of the background. So why do a study and not just map out your assets? So Robert already spoke about some of the work that's gone into establishing mapping based on available information, trying to clean that up, make that better, make that more informative and useful. So the goal of this study is to really supplement and build on what's been done. So Robert mentioned criticality. We want to focus on the most critical assets in this watershed and really make sure we're getting the best bang for the buck, because as he mentioned, there's some assets that, while yes, they have some effect on their surrounding area, they're not as critical, they're not as important, and there's not just unlimited money to go fix everything, go replace everything. So some of the things that a map doesn't necessarily tell you is, if a pipe fails, what size should go back there? Do you just put the same size in, or is there some benefit to putting in a larger size because you're going to have to come back and tear it out in a few years anyway, and put something back bigger because of development or because of other challenges that are occurring? What's the consequence of failure? Like Robert was talking about. Also, what's the level of service? So basically, how often does it flood? Is it every time it rains? Could it just flood in a tropical storm? And also, are your streams or your ditches, your channels big enough? Sometimes there can be challenges in the channel itself that aren't apparent just at the pipe, and you may have flooding that's just happening as water gets out of the banks. So those are all things that a map isn't necessarily, or inventory isn't necessarily going to tell you. So going through this pilot watershed study, once again, is trying to build on the different things identified in the gap analysis, use those processes, and flesh out that information. So we'd start with some data collection, just reviewing available data sources, doing some field evaluation of the stream channels to identify areas that are eroded, and other issues that may be going on there. Public outreach is a big part of this. The best people that know the system the best are the citizens, and also those who work in the community. So one of the big items of this is trying to get or putting out a web platform, a website where citizens could go and drop a point and add pictures or add descriptions of issues they see, highlight intersections that they see flooded all the time, or if they see the channel in their backyard is eroded, they can put in information about that. Some of that public outreach is happening tonight and would happen at the end of the project, where we would come back in front of council and present, and get buy-in on what we're doing, as well as outreach with, individuals who work with stormwater every day, and then also going to community events and trying to reach out to people just as they're out and about and maybe interested in talking about issues they see. We would then move on to, at the same time, inventory would be going on those critical assets. And in this project, we're having kind of studied the information that's available and the areas that are managed by the city. We're estimating 500 structures to be inventoried. That would represent, it's roughly 50% of the structures in the total watershed, but close to 80% of the structures that are actually city responsibility. So there are areas that are not part of the city limits that are in this watershed. There are roads which are DOT maintained, and so those would not necessarily be inventoried as part of this. But in a lot of cases, we already have spatial mapping. We already have something on a map showing there's a pipe there. This would just be going back and supplementing with detailed information on the most critical assets. So the goal would be to be closer to 100% of the critical assets that we would have full data on. That inventory information, as well as the information gleaned from the public, would then be fed into kind of two different analysis. So one is the updating the criticality analysis, so taking the detailed information we receive from the field, re-ranking and seeing what assets rise to the top as being the most consequential if they fail, and being ones which, based on condition assessment done in the field, would be likely to fail. While that's going on, we'd also be doing hydrologic and hydraulic modeling to understand where flooding may occur. So seeing the limits of the flooding, seeing if there are situations where houses, businesses, roads would be flooded out and be either impassable or cause structural damage. Those analyses would then be fed into the overall watershed master plan, which would really be the outline of everything we've seen here, as well as projects which are identified from both the modeling and the criticality analysis. So we would come out with a list of capital improvement projects, and they would be ranked based on kind of the bang for the buck that you're getting from it, as well as some of the environmental factors, where they are, and potentially their eligibility for funding. And then finally, the top 3 projects we would do conceptual design on, so that you would have something more than just a sketch. You would have something that could be the basis of actual design, as well as a detailed cost estimate, so that you have that information ready to go when funding opportunities present themselves. And as Robert mentioned, this is a 12-month process with kind of public outreach covering most of the time, data collection activities up front, your analysis pieces in the middle, with the master plan occurring in the last portion. So final deliverables, there would be an update to the inventory data, as I mentioned, and that would be provided or seamlessly transitioned into the structure, the format that's already been established. The modeling, input, output, the extents of where flooding is projected to go, that would all be delivered. There would be O&M, operations and maintenance recommendations for, there may be pipes that are critical, but their condition is good. So it's important to stay active with inspecting those, with making sure their condition is staying good, so that they don't become an emergency fix in the future. Because those O&M activities are much more economical than having to do an emergency fix. There'd also be that prioritized capital improvement project list with cost estimates to help with budgetary planning, and then conceptual design on the most critical projects. And the goal of this watershed study is really to prepare for future opportunities. So it's to establish a repeatable, documented process, so that as other basins are studied, you can maintain a consistent approach and not just have a willy-nilly, kind of whoever's looking at it comes up with a different answer or different criteria. Being the pilot watershed, it's also an opportunity to learn about the system, to come up with, there may be tweaks to the approach or things that are really relevant to Greer that are not maybe relevant in other communities. And then also, we want to look for opportunities to position for funding. So at least 50% of this basin overlaps with areas that are eligible for state revolving fund opportunities, and then the whole basin is actually within the South Tiger sub-watershed plan, which would open up opportunities for EPA 319 clean water funding. So certainly projects that would potentially fall in really in either of those buckets, but even in both buckets, would be something that we would want to look for and want to recommend, and provide opportunities to help pre-position for funding, because there are a lot of communities where when this funding comes out, they have nothing. They're at square zero. So having that jump start is important. And with that, I'll let Robert come back up.
Thank you, Earl. Yeah, so with that, the engineering department is seeking funding approval in the amount of $249,600 for this proposed pilot watershed study. This was a budgeted project for the 2022-2023 fiscal year. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
For the purpose of discussion, I'll entertain a motion to accept the funding approval for the pilot watershed study.
So moved.
And a second. Floor is open.
I understand about inventorying our assets and the inlet boxes and, all of that, the man-made things. You mentioned about studying the streams, and Maple Creek was the one. But what are you looking at? What are you looking at when you're going to start looking at Maple Creek? What are you looking for?
So for the stream itself, at least as relates to the capacity of the stream, so how much water it can carry before it would flood, a lot of that comes down to the channel shape. If it's very shallow and doesn't have steep, doesn't have much bank going on, and it, can spread out easily. That's part of it. Also, if it's overgrown, if there's things like natural obstructions that would cause flow to back up. And then also there are areas where extreme erosion is seen. That's a situation where flow is kind of getting out of control and starting to eat into the bank. So there's high velocity issues happening there.
Go back to the previous slide, which was at the city park, or not city park, but Century Park.
The final slide.
Yes. When you look at this slide, and you were saying, well, we're going to look at the channel width and depth. Now, are you looking at the floodplain, or are you looking at the flow of the water there? That's the first question I would have.
Well, we're looking at the dimensions of the floodplain, the channel measurements, and then we are, as well as, in this case, you have some nice meanders through there, and so that's kind of a natural way of, flow slowing itself down and preventing erosion and it being a healthy stream. So we are making notes and making observances about the flow, but the goal of getting the channel dimensions would be really to, as part of our modeling process, we would simulate flow and how it would move through the channel and whether it would be contained, just in the banks itself. Is it going to go out on the floodplain? And in this case, there isn't a house right there. There isn't a business right there. If it was a situation where there was a business and flow came out, or there was a house, then that would be an issue. In other situations where you have open floodplain and good buffer, it's part of the natural process, and it's better for it to.
But we shouldn't be building in a floodplain, correct?
Correct, yeah, of course. But there may be pre-existing structures within the floodplain. That's like things that have been there for a long time.
Okay, so I see where we over the years have put riprap in this this bend in the creek, and obviously that bend that's just what creeks and rivers do. They move. I just want to make sure what you're talking about. I mean, we don't develop into the floodplains. We don't go in grading. We don't do stuff like that. Now, maybe in the past, but I'm talking about now. If we've got this floodplain here, how much does it play in the development of a new development that's going to catch all this water and it's going to be funneled? Because all the water now is going to the creek one way or the other, correct?
Yeah, or to
in the surrounding area.
Yes.
So I mean, or would if you went out and inspected Maple Creek, this same exact site, and there was no large stone riprap around through there, would you come in and say, yep, we need to go and stabilize this bank? Or would you say, no, that's just the natural way it is? It'll move back and forth. It'll fill in some areas it's going to erode.
I mean, I wouldn't say that, like, without having seen the riprap, what was there prior to the riprap, I couldn't say. Because if it was, like, violently eroding and you had a big drop down the bank where flow had clearly been eating away and chewing into the bank, then yes, that would be a candidate for bank stabilization. If it came down kind of naturally, like what you see there, and there was no riprap there, I wouldn't necessarily say that would be an issue. But like I said, I would have to have seen the prior condition to be able to judge.
But what you're doing with the streams, since all water in this basin flows to this stream and then on to the, I guess, South Tiger, correct? Then it would not limit development.
This is really trying to understand the flow as it exists currently and trying to, the goal of this is primarily to address existing concerns or like I said, where people have seen flooding or where, things are already predicted to flood. It's not a, it's looking more for what we would call retrofit opportunity. It's not backwards, or it's not forward focused necessarily on development, because there's already stormwater ordinances about pre-post and limiting runoff from new development. So this is trying to fill in, like we can make ordinances for new development. We can't make ordinances for stuff that exists already. And so this is trying to fill the gap.
We're not looking to limit development in any way. And just on the floodplain issue, development in the floodplain is allowed, just has to meet certain criteria.
You have to build for it. Correct. Yes. You have to build for building in the floodplain. Well, one final question. This is Robert. Do we have areas in the city anymore that are susceptible to flooding for a normal event, not a 15-inch rainfall in 12 hours, but do we have?
We got our problem areas. I think everyone knows over on Suber Road, just south of Riverside High School, in the curve there, that's pretty much our #1 spot. Anytime we get a heavy rain, that road overtops, but that's a SCDOT road, so not much we can do there. And then the last big flood event we had, the bottom of the watershed in question did have some flooding and the bridges overtopped there. I think it was Harvey Road and I think it's Acorn Street, those bridges overtopped.
In Harvey, that's a state road, right?
It is, portions are county and city.
Yeah, the roads I've seen overtop generally are, like Jones Avenue, I've seen it overtop big time, but in it, that's a state road as well, so. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yeah, so part of this is walking the streams, finding those critical pieces of infrastructure. Hey, this culvert's blocked up or prone to blocking up. We need to keep an eye on it at all times, make sure we don't flood everything upstream of it. So that's one piece of this project as well.
Timing wise, how long do you think it's going to take you to do this basin?
It's a 12-month
Okay.
process,
So
that's-
it's going to be okay with the EPA grant portion. We're not going to run out of time or anything. We'll still be in a good window to identify projects.
That's the goal. That's one of the overarching goals, is to set the foundation and have projects identified to go after that type of funding.
Does this project depend on having rain?
Having rain?
Yeah.
No,
No.
sir.
No, you can do this project without rain.
Yeah, that's kind of the purpose of the, hydraulic modeling, is you're taking historic or projected rainfall and simulating what would happen. So gathering the physical dimensions of the infrastructure and of the channels is kind of the more important aspect, and that, honestly, it's probably better if stuff's not flooded with that, to collect that information.
But for the public outreach piece, having rain is needed so people can identify the problem areas and submit their complaints and general knowledge of when flood events happen. So yes and no, to answer your question.
Back to the rain question. Now I'm just curious, we're going off historic data. Are we going to be putting any rain gauges out just for grins and giggles, see if it's different or similar? Just curious.
Robert.
That's not in the scope. If we get to the end of the project and say, hey, this is a really good idea to do that, that's would definitely be looked at that time.
Okay.
So I guess this is hypothetical, but based on the last two comments, I'm assuming that there is just some level that you figure you're not going to exceed, but 2,000-year floods in Kentucky in 1 month, 2 500-year floods in Death Valley in 2 weeks, 100-year floods now almost on a monthly basis somewhere in South Carolina. Do we change the definition of what a 1,000-year flood is or a 500-year flood is, or do we change our approach to how we handle those?
So you can't design for everything, and the 100-year flood, 1,000-year flood is kind of a misnomer. It doesn't mean that flood's gonna happen once every 1,000 years. A 100-year flood means it has a 1% chance of happening in any given year. So it's not really a once in a 5-generation deal. It's a 1% chance of happening in any given year.
And I would say certainly NOAA is, I mean, that's a hot topic with, as far as their research and in establishing those historical trends, because, I mean, it's obviously a question on a lot of people's mind. That does kind of get to the idea of, yes, it may be infrastructure that you haven't maybe seen flood before, but we do simulate larger storms, and it is good to know, you know, are your critical, like, arteries or are critical, you know, businesses or facilities, could they be impacted in a severe emergency situation? Are they going to be passed?
So through the simulation, you could pop out a 100-year flood or
Yes.
or a 500-year flood just to see what kind of damage it would go, or area it would go, right?
Yes,
Okay.
that's right.
Good. Others, anything else?
Well, I guess just looking long range, if we do this study and we rectify any problems that we have, what about the people downstream now? What are they gonna do? Because we're obviously gonna make their load larger. in
I'm
this-
going to ask about the people upstream that aren't helping us out at all.
Well, this is true.
Thankfully, we're almost at the top of the string.
It looks like at some point, you almost have to involve people upstream and downstream of all of this.
That's the goal, is to take this pilot project and move on to the other watersheds and apply it to other areas of the city. Whether that be, yeah, we need to do all 7 stages of the scope in every watershed, or piecemeal it, apply the stream walks in this watershed, or do the inventory in this watershed and fill in with.
Of course, if you go tinkering with any of this, there's a state agency that's gonna say, we gotta know everything you're gonna do, right?
Depending on if they're existing crossings or infrastructure or new impacts to the streams, yes, sir.
And they would probably notify people downstream.
It depends.
Potentially,
Yeah.
but yeah, it depends on the project, size of the project.
Well, answer this question for me then, and it might help Riley. If we make improvements to this watershed, and all you're really doing is making sure the water's flowing where it needs to flow, regardless of the improvements, the same amount of water is going downstream. Is that
Yeah,
right?
but
Well,
instead of gathering in the streets and yards, it's going down quicker away from us. So the people downstream are gonna get a bigger flow at one time.
well, and I should be clear. So I've talked about pipes and primarily as because that's everybody has seen pipe and knows the concept there. But you know, we will look at other project types beyond just upsizing pipes, because you're right, that does have impacts downstream that can worsen things elsewhere if you're, you know, suddenly putting double the water downstream. It's an extreme, you know, hyperbole, but you know what I mean, if we're putting a lot more flow downstream. And so we do look at other project types, such as being able to retain water or allow it to infiltrate closer to before it reaches the stream. So at that point, it would be more part of the groundwater system as opposed to just runoff that would impact. So that's certainly in the types of things that we would, you know, the types of projects we would look at. But that's part of getting to understand the watershed, getting to understand where potential sites for that sort of thing would be available or attractive to do. So just because I've been talking about pipes, I don't want you to think that's all we're gonna do is, you know, make everything bigger, because that's not a sustainable approach, honestly.
Thank you. Others? Funding approval on the pilot watershed study. Comments? Questions? Discussion?
I got one other question. Does this come out of stormwater?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, that would seem to me to be a use of those funds as it was intended.
Sir? Next item before us is a purchase approval of lawn maintenance equipment procurement. Travis Durham joins us for that discussion and will ready himself for 20 minutes worth of questions about lawnmowers.
Yeah. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm before you this evening seeking approval to proceed with purchase of 2 lawnmowers, athletic field mowers within the Public Services Grounds Division. As you are aware, we were funded for the purchase of a John Deere 6500A and a Toro Reelmaster 3100D. These are athletic field reel mowers, and they are in our lease purchase fund 10 for the 22-23 budget. After sales tax on these units, they came out to be more than what was approved. And on the John Deere, there's an overage of $4,720.30. On the Toro is an overage of $3,046.80. In your packet, in the memo I submitted, there was a $904 miscalculation on the Toro overage, and that was a miscalculation on my behalf that I realized at about 4 o'clock this afternoon, so I apologize for that. While these purchases would be over the approved budgeted amount, I think there's enough cost savings that we will see across our Fund 10 lease purchase items that will allow us to make these purchases. I'm getting some quotes back on vehicles and equipment as it stands now, and seeing that we will in fact be under budget on some other things down the line that will allow us to have funds to cover these. Both of these units will be coming from sole dealers who hold the state contract through South Carolina State Procurement, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at this time.
For the purpose of discussion, the purchase approval process for the lawn maintenance equipment procurement comes before us this evening. I'll entertain a motion to receive.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Floor is open for discussion.
Travis, I know we got this is a little side item, I saw this with a reel mower. Didn't we get a blade sharpener or something a few years ago?
At the golf course, there is one, yes.
Do y'all don't take advantage of that, or do you just take it?
We're still in our process. I think the golf course may still be in the process. They fine-tuned it more than we have of using that piece of equipment. We haven't had the time to send somebody that direction with enough time to sit and perfect that. We have still been working with Stephen and his staff on how to get our reels that we currently have down there to him, so we can start saving that money on contracting that out when we need that service performed. So they do have one at the golf course.
How many reel mowers do we have now?
We currently have one that we just got. It was ordered in last year's budget, last April actually. It just showed up about a month and a half ago. And then that was the second. There was a John Deere that may have been purchased 14, 15 years ago. So we have 2 currently, and this will be 2 additional. So our John Deere is to the point now that John Deere themselves does not offer large repair support on it. You go to Greenville Turf and Tractor over out in Piedmont, and they have some out on a pallet that if you needed a hydraulic pump for, they could sell you one that they will rebuild. And if there's not one there, there's not really one you're going to find anywhere. So we're working, trying to get those items that are phasing out through dealers' support replaced. So these will help us. These will actually be, one will be another athletic field mower that kind of roams around and catches a couple different places, and one will be stationed at Country Club Road Park that'll just maintain those baseball fields and the 2.5 soccer fields that are up there. So
We are doing a great job. You know, my son's playing flag football this year, and we spent a lot of time out there, and that park and facility is beautiful, and the turf is manicured, well taken care of.
thank you.
We've enjoyed playing at Little Turner this year, and been to several of the other parks too, and they all look great. They're doing a good job.
Well, fantastic. I'll pass that along. Thank you.
Others?
Mr. Durham, what's the expected longevity of a mower like this?
I can tell you the John Deere that we've had, we've gotten 14, 15 years out of with the maintenance and the upkeep that we perform or we send out to be performed through John Deere. I think realistically, you're probably in around a 10 or 15 year time frame on these 2 items.
Purchase approval of lawn maintenance equipment procurement. Questions? Comments? Discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Miss Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Council, let's move to the first reading of ordinance number 54-2022. This is an ordinance to change the zoning classification of properties owned by Nancy and Brian Curran and Julio Munoz located on Delgrave Road and Laura Street extension from C3 to DRD. Ms. Cotty joins us for this conversation. Floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And I do want to point out as I start, the slides that I have are combined because this is one project. However, there are two kind of sets of parcels with different property owners. So the one that we're going to focus on right now is Ordinance 54-2022, which are these two larger parcels. And then there are three smaller parcels or portions of parcels right to the north that will be part of Ordinance 55-2022. But this is one project overall, so I wanted to kind of show the whole scope of that as we go along. So this is, again, a rezoning request. The current zoning is C3 highway commercial, and then the taupe color that you see above it is RM1 residential multifamily. The future land use map is suburban commercial. This is a current street view of the site. And again, this is across the street from the Walmart, the Super Walmart, and then the strip center. And then this is the proposed site plan. They are proposing up to 78 units for a single-story attached rental product. So they do have a parking ratio of 1.68 per unit. They do have a 12.5-foot landscape buffer and setback landscape buffer that'll be between the residential properties, and then they do have a 12.5-foot setback along the whole perimeter of the property as well. We do require, again, with DRD projects, higher quality building materials, so they would be required to put hardy board, brick or stone veneer, and a combination of these accent materials. They would also be required to put in exterior sidewalks, again, along Lorla. So I'm flipping back to the site plan. And then they were not required to do a traffic study in this case, but they would be responsible for any right-of-way dedication or widening, pavement repair that would be along Lorla and Delagrave along its borders. This would typically be figured out during civil plan review if the property were to be rezoned and the project were to go forward. So based on surrounding land uses and future land use map, and Planning Advisory Committee did review this project as well and provide comments and initial input back in June of 2022. Based on all of those factors, staff does recommend approval. Planning Commission held a public hearing on September 19th, and they also recommended approval. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
For the purpose of discussion, I'll entertain a motion to receive first reading of ordinance number 54-2022.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
By show of hand, is the owner of the property or representative of the owner of the property with us this evening? Record will indicate nobody indicated so. Floor is open for discussion.
These are all to be rental.
Yes, it would be a multifamily rental community. Mm-hmm.
And it may have said in there, but I missed it, I guess. Are they to be 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms?
So actually, the intent right now, the statement of intent does not hold them to a certain bedroom. However, the intent is actually a very small unit, less than 500 square feet. They are kind of aiming at the senior demographic, or they've initially met with GCRA and some other organizations to kind of gauge just given that this is so close to Wade Hampton, potentially future transit opportunities with bus, and then work opportunities with that corridor. They do kind of see this as a different kind of market. They have talked about having some 2-bedroom units and smaller units on kind of the end units. But again, they're not necessarily held to that. This would just be a maximum unit. But that is their intent right now, is to have very small units where it's intended for one person or, a couple that wanted to downsize and live together.
500 square feet, yeah, that's really
It's small, yeah.
So the future land use plan was for what?
The future land use map calls for this whole area to be suburban commercial. Again, it's,
Is that what these are, suburban commercial units?
no, but I mean, one of the secondary uses for suburban commercial is multifamily. In this case, staff feels like this type of higher density housing is a good transition between the high intensity commercial uses and then the traditional neighborhood that it borders. So,
If they cut it down a little bit and make them a little bit bigger, that would be my thought. Because I did ride by there and it did look like, a nice area to sit in, a new little subdivision. Of course, I'd always prefer it be sold and rental. I'm not in the market of buying anything right now.
yeah.
So my thought would be to be a little bit bigger, and I would always prefer something to be for sale rather than rent, so if they could do like small patio homes or something in there, or small condominiums, 2-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 1 bath, 2-bedroom, 2 bath, whatever, yeah.
Scotty, have we had a product like this? I don't remember anything like this recently coming on. So in other words, I think there may be a need for something like this. I consider that with a lot of seniors that I've worked with, where they're in situations where, they've been widowed or need to downsize or something like that, and they need a smaller space, to move into. And I think this being on one level gives them, access to a product like this. And so it's different because we just don't see this very often. And I think, I understand what Riley's thinking with this suburban commercial thought is that, the map, it looks like on the map that it just lights up pink and it's supposed to be commercial, knowing that Walmart's sitting next door. And so that's my only struggle with it is, where it is. It's not that the product is not viable and shouldn't exist. It should, and there seems to be a need for it. I think they're going down the right path with this.
Yeah, and I will say that the future land use map, applies suburban commercial kind of from Wade Hampton and then a certain, distance from it. But if you look at the current zoning map and the actual uses on the ground, this particular area is residential. It is kind of that kind of border, again, between the commercial uses and the residential.
I agree with the fact about one level, because there are very few one-level properties available for sale or for rent. So, and that, it just 500 square feet just seems. But if they're
and again,
that
is not in the statement of intent. They're not held to that square footage. That was just the initial kind of intent, was that these would be smaller units, and this would be kind of the maximum number of units if they went with that square footage. If they did mix in some bigger ones or have some bigger, they would likely lose units, and we wouldn't bring that back, but they wouldn't be allowed to increase that number.
But part of the DRD is that it is single story, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yes.
why it is interesting and attractive to me, because I just don't think we have a product in the city right now with that type of volume and availability for people to get access to. So, that's why I would support it.
You don't, I was gonna say, you don't think this would be similar to the Creekside? It's hardy board with brick on the bottom, probably 500 or less, ran by GCRA or Housing Alliance. You know what I'm talking about? Off Bible Brook?
I don't know the exact square footage, but I mean,
they're
that would
small.
seem, they are smaller. I mean, again, the layout is Initially, they came as a townhouse community, and then as they kind of went along, they realized there is a market for this. And again, they did meet with GCRA and have some of these conversations. It won't be a GCRA project, and it won't be necessarily an affordable housing project, but they did have certain target audiences in mind with this product.
Well, as far as residential, it is a good area there with, Walmart within walking distance and a couple of other businesses there on 29 within walking distance. And the concept, the location, I thought looked great, but I was kind of surprised that they were going to be so small.
Others?
Just one item you may want to just put in your notes to talk to the developer about. Delgrave, there was a chemical plant factory or chemical warehouse right at that end of Delgrave, and it burned. I don't know if there's contamination or not, and they've probably done soil borings, but that might just be a question you want
Okay,
to ask.
absolutely.
Also, if you hear any rumblings of what it would cost to rent, I am curious of.
I don't have that information. I'm not sure they're that far along in the process either.
Shouldn't be much, right? It's only 500 square feet.
Others? Comments? Questions? Discussion? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Miss Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
No. Let's move to first reading of ordinance number 55-2022. This is a ordinance to change the zoning classification of a property and portions of properties owned by Next Gen Investments LLC located on Hampton Road and Laura Street extension from RM1 to DRD. Ms. Cotty.
Thank you. So again, this is, I'm going to pull up the original aerial. So the reason there are two separate ordinances is because there are two separate property owner groups, but this is part of the project that we just discussed for part of 54-2022. Ordinance 55 is for the 3 parcels or portion of parcels to the north that are currently zoned RM1. I'm happy to answer any questions you have or go through the full slides again, but.
For the purpose then of discussion, this is the first reading of ordinance number 55-2022. I'll entertain a motion to receive.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Floor is open for discussion. Is the owner of the property or representative of the owner of the property with us this evening? Record will indicate no one indicated so. Floor is open for discussion. Comments? Questions? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Miss Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
No. Council, let's move to the fifth item before us this evening under new readings, the first of which, or the first reading of ordinance number 59-2022. This is an ordinance to provide for the annexation of certain properties owned by the Spinks Company LLC located on Highway 1 and Reedville Road by 100% petition and to establish a zoning classification of C3 for said property. Ms. Cotty.
Thank you. So this is an annexation request for 3 parcels, one 4.58 acres, one 9.75 acres. Oh, no, that is not right, sorry. Oh, no, that total, 4.5 acres total. Again, the 3 parcels that you see in the aerial. This is located at the intersection of Highway 101, 296 Kist Road area, and as you can most likely tell from the applicant and property owner, that it is intended to be a Spinks gas station. So they are requesting C3 highway commercial. So this is an aerial view of the site. This is a current zoning map. Again, the immediate vicinity is C3 highway commercial. Across the road, you do see some RM2 residential multifamily that will be a potential apartment complex that came through council about a year ago. And then this is the future land use map. I will point out that while the parcels are labeled traditional neighborhood, this does fall along a transitional corridor, and it is within the quarter mile of a neighborhood center, which is the green dot that you see. This is the current street view of the site, and then kind of surrounding zoning and land uses, again, kind of that C3 and vacant areas. So based on future land use, kind of proximity to the corridors that you've seen, staff does recommend approval. Planning Commission is scheduled to have a public hearing next week, October 17th. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
For the purpose of discussion, I'll entertain a motion to receive.
Second.
Floor is open for discussion. By show of hand, is the owner of the property or representative of the owner of the property here this evening? Thank you, sir. Are you available for questions?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Floor is open for discussion. If you'll come to the podium, please, sir. A fairly simple question, but at one point in time, had the Spinks Company acquired land at the corner of 85 and 101 at some point or not?
At 85 and Highway 101, yes, we do own land up there. As you come out of BMW, we own about 8 acres through our company and affiliate LLCs.
Okay.
Currently, we've got
So
a
you're
project.
moving that one store back?
We're
basically moving it across the street, right?
The Burger King, we're moving next door to a new facility
Okay.
currently.
All right.
That's scheduled to open Thursday.
Okay, all right. Thank you. I was just unclear about that. Okay.
Just did the CO inspection today.
Thank you.
So you're ready to start cooking there, huh? And selling some gas?
Yes, sir.
Anybody else? Questions of representative of the owner? Thank you, sir. I appreciate your attendance tonight.
Thank you.
Ms. Scotty, is there any type of consideration, with the lake that's back behind there as far as, what we require of gas stations when they come into areas and, as far as runoff and different things like that? Is there anything unique about this situation?
Not that I know of, but at this point, it's just an annexation request, and whether or not the zoning is compatible, they will be required to go through Planning Advisory Committee and full site plan development review with our stormwater engineer and all of our partners.
Have you ever seen what they use to fish for catfish, for bait?
Yeah.
That's an environmental hazard in and of itself. Others? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Earwood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas, Mr. Bettis, Ms. Albert, Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, let's move to the first reading of ordinance number 60-2022. This is an ordinance to provide for the annexation of a certain property owned by Route 2 LLC located on North Dobson Road by 100% petition and to establish a zoning classification of RM2 for said property. Ms. Cotty?
Sure. This is a similar situation where there are 3 different property owners, but the parcels are adjacent to each other. So I just, for ease of kind of explaining the potential project, I did have the slides as one project. However, ordinance, you can see on the aerial, ordinance 60 is that largest middle parcel, and then the subsequent ordinances 61 and 62 will come. The first one, 60, that we're talking about is approximately 9.75 acres. Then there's an 8.15 acre site. And then finally, the piece adjacent to North Dobson is 6.19 acres. So this is near the intersection of Wade Hampton and North Dobson Road. You can see the Toyota and other automotive sites that are adjacent to the property. This is our current zoning map. Again, the fuchsia color that you see is C3 highway commercial. And then this is our future land use map. Again, the pink that you see is suburban commercial, and then that peachish color that borders it is traditional neighborhood. There is a really small sliver of light yellow that's a mapping error that has the label for suburban neighborhood, so just ignore that. It is a mapping error, but it is bordering on traditional neighborhood. This is a current street view of the site. And then as far as their request, again, they are currently not in. They're asking to annex and come into the city and zone RM2 residential multifamily. They do intend to develop an apartment complex. This would have to go through Board of Zoning Appeals for a special exception if it were to be annexed and zoned RM2 and move forward as an apartment complex. Again, based on the comprehensive plan and future land use map, surrounding uses, staff does recommend approval. Planning Commission will have a public hearing next Monday night, October 17th. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
For the purpose of discussion, I'll entertain a motion to receive.
Second.
And a second. Floor is open for discussion. By show of hand, is the owner of the property or representative of the owner of the property with us this evening? Record will indicate so. Are you available for questions if they arise? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Floor is open for discussion.
What were you, go back to the point you were making about having to go back to the zoning.
Oh, yeah, so apartment complexes, which are considered group development, are not allowed by right in residential multifamily, either 1 or 2. So this would be to request zoning of RM2, which is residential multifamily, and then they would be required to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for the special use of group development.
Is there any reason why not to do one that would be consistent with what we will allow? Like for apartment complex, what typically would somebody do an apartment complex at?
RM1 and RM2, those are
Okay.
the zoning districts that it's allowed. It's only allowed by special exception. So they have to meet additional requirements that are laid out in the ordinance in order to have that special exception.
Okay, maybe I'm just confused now.
Yeah,
So-
apartments aren't allowed by right in any zoning district except, I believe, C1, which is downtown.
Okay.
So it is very consistent with every other apartment complex. So we do, those are the 2 districts, again, residential multifamily that we consider for multifamily. But it does have to go through that extra step to make sure it meets certain criteria to have the apartment complex versus some of the other uses that are allowed, like duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes.
And if it goes to the zoning board of appeals and they deny it, the only recourse the applicant has is civil action, correct?
Yes, for the special exception, for the use of apartment complex. Again, this is something that will be addressed in the Unified Development Ordinance. There will certainly be certain districts where apartment complexes are allowed by right, but currently that is the way our ordinance stands.
Do you anticipate a traffic study would be done?
Yes, absolutely. It is in the works. DOT has provided an initial draft and asked for additional clarification on some of the numbers that came out of it, and they also asked for a right turn analysis from North Dobson onto Wade Hampton. So that is, again, currently in the works.
So if I'm on North Dobson, making a right on Wade Hampton?
Yes, they're currently performing that analysis.
Ms. Cuddy, do you know what the intention would be around Durham Road? What conversation, how that would fit into, in talking to some of the constituents from that Fernwood Drive neighborhood, it's, you know, turning onto Dobson and off of Dobson, when there are cars coming from, it's a little confusing there, how they both kind of come to a point that way, potentially adding more cars, more trips, you know, coming and going.
Yeah, at this point, I do not, but I can certainly relay that to Mr. Smith and Mr. Wilson at DOT to see if they can take an extra look at that intersection.
I've driven the length of Dobson the last couple of days, just to refamiliarize myself. I mean, it's pretty narrow, for sure.
It is.
There's a couple pretty good curves there already. Talking to some of my residents in that Fernwood neighborhood, it is used as a little bit of a cut through, kind of coming from 357 out to Wade Hampton that way. The mornings, it already does back up just a little bit. No big, huge complaints, but that's, I mean, I think that is the concern. The residents that I did speak to, they're kind of cautiously optimistic about this product as opposed to, you know, some sort of other commercial, you know, center with shops. And the example that was given was, I'd rather have this than like a Shops at Green Ridge type thing, you know, right in our backyard. And, you know, having conversations with the applicants, you know, over the course of months, I think the product, the intended product sounds very nice. I love the idea of this type of product coming to this end of Wade Hampton as well. I think there's a place for that on this end of Wade Hampton. We had Dobson. What really for me, I'm cautiously supportive based on just that traffic intersection at Wade Hampton. What improvements would be needed at, you know, along Dobson as well.
Yeah, so I mean, again, at this point, the traffic study is just in the draft form, so we have not finalized required improvements. But it is SCDOT that's acting as our third-party reviewer in this case. North Dobson is a city, well, will be a city road for this portion if it is annexed in. It is a county road in other portions. However, given the proximity to the Wade Hampton intersection, they were willing to take on that role as the third-party reviewer. So we certainly may have some more updates before second reading. Again, they just initiated that traffic study, anticipating that they're going to be submitting their special exception and site plan. So typically it would come a little later in the process when they did their planning advisory committee meeting and then their civil plan submittal. It just happens that in this case, it is kind of in review currently.
So we wouldn't anticipate having final anything?
It's possible. They have indicated that they may not want second reading until early December or January. So it's very possible that by then we will have, yes, to line up with closing. That's a very common request to hold second reading. So it's very possible that we'll have those required improvements finalized by that point. So I can certainly bring updates to second reading.
For me at least, it would be helpful.
Yes, definitely. And I did want to address, so our traffic studies are typically for intersection functionality and improvements. However, in addition to that, we also, in our land development regulations, have requirements that width and pavement condition have to be brought up to city standards along projects. So they will be required to dedicate right-of-way, widen the roadway if they don't meet, which I suspect in this case it doesn't, minimum standards for city streets.
And that I heard you correctly, basically Dobson that would be bordering this development would be...
Yes, it is part of the annexation consideration, so we would take the road on.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
So, to be clear, with this project, if we annex it, they would have to bring that section of road to city standards?
Yes, sir, if and when they develop.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious how Durham Road is gonna come. That's actually where my family originally started, Durham Road, right there, all that property back there. So I am kind of cautious a little bit on this one.
Well, and it is labeled, but it's actually part of the parcel and not right of way. So
yeah. So
That's
then
yet to be seen what will happen with
Yeah.
that. We have talked with DOT a little bit about trying to realign that intersection. It may not be the full responsibility of this developer, but taking into account, future developments that may come along North Dobson. And that particular portion does belong to the automotive dealerships. There may be opportunity to work with them to see if they'd be willing to dedicate right-of-way to work with the city to be able to do some improvements. So it's definitely part of the conversation, but not necessarily part of this project.
Given the amount of conversation in this regard, would any of y'all like to address or update us on anything that's taking place that might be a benefit to this conversation? I am sure that you have noted our concerns, but if you would like to address council, please come to the podium, and if you would, give your name and address as a matter of the record. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mayor and council, good evening. My name is Mike Pitts with Parker Poe, 110 East Court Street in Greenville. I represent the Streams Development Company that has this property under control. And this is Alex DiMartico with the Streams. He can answer any questions that y'all may have that are project specific about the product itself. And then we also have a representative from the Seaman Whitesides civil engineering firm here as well, in anticipation of any questions you folks might have this evening.
Yes, and my address is 100 South Hudson in Greenville as well.
I'm assuming that you have noted the concerns about the road and y'all are addressing that?
Yes, in fact, I'm scheduled to meet with Bradshaw Motors. Thank you to Andy and Reno for providing a contact for me there. We're meeting with them on Thursday to talk. The specific reason is just to start the discussion about the right turn and potential widening of the road there. I think I've mentioned to some of you previously that I was expecting to need to dedicate some right-of-way along Dotson Road in order to be able to handle the additional traffic. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else material to update, but just that we received the comments from DOT. Our traffic engineer immediately responded. He was asked to make some changes in calculations. Those are being done. We understand. We intend to own this long term. That's our general way of doing things, to own them 5 to 10 years or longer. This is certainly something we'd want to do. So as a result, we want to get it right. We're going to live in it. Our people are going to work there. It's important to us to be part of the community. We do not intend to just build this and sell. I know that's many people's intent, but that's not how we operate.
Thank you, sir. Okay. We appreciate your time. Others? Thank you.
Thank you.
Council. Ordinance 60, 2022. Questions? Comments? Discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Duncan.
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, let's move to the first reading of ordinance number 61-2022. This is an ordinance to provide for the annexation of certain property owned by Joseph M. Davis and Diane S. Davis Miners Trust, with the primary beneficiary Desiree L. Davis, located on North Dobson Road by 100% petition, and to establish a zoning classification of RM2 for said property. Ms. Cotty.
So as you can see on the aerial, this is related to ordinance 61. This is the 8.15 acre piece to the east. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
For the purpose of discussion, I'll entertain a motion to receive.
So moved.
Second.
And a second. Floor is open for discussion. By show of hand, is the owner of the property or representative of the owner of the property with us this evening? Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. We appreciate it and appreciate your time. It's been an unusually long meeting this evening, and we appreciate you sticking with us. Floor is open for discussion. Comments? Questions? Hearing none, Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert? Mayor Danner?
Yes. Council, the first reading of ordinance number 62-2022. This is an ordinance to provide for the annexation of certain property owned by Lakeland LLC located on North Dobson Road by 100% petition and to establish a zoning classification of RM2 residential multifamily for said property. Ms. Cotty.
Sure, thank you. Again, I have the exhibit on screen with the aerial. This is in reference to Ordinance 62, the 6.19 acre piece on the western edge of this project that borders North Dobson Road. I'm happy to answer any questions.
For the purpose of discussion, I'll entertain a motion to receive.
Second.
Motion and a second. Floor is open for discussion. By show of hand, is the owner of the property or representative of the owner of the property here this evening? Thank you. With that, then, the floor is open for discussion. Comments? Questions? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood?
Yes.
Mr. Booker?
Yes.
Mr. Hopper?
Yes.
Mr. Dumas?
Yes.
Mr. Bettis?
Yes.
Ms. Albert? Mayor Danner?
Yes. First reading of ordinance number 63-2022, an ordinance to provide for the annexation of a certain property owned by Christine Associate Living Trust, Christine Social, located on Sizemore Street by a 100% petition and to establish a zoning classification of C2 for said property. Ms. Cotty.
Sure, thank you. This, again, is an annexation request. This is located on Arlington Road and at the intersection of Sizemore Street. For your reference, this is directly across the street from the DMV that many of you recognize. It is a 0.3 acre parcel. And again, they are requesting C2. This is the current zoning map. Adjacent properties are all zoned C3. Staff felt that C2 would be an appropriate transition between some of the more intense commercial uses and some of the residential uses that it borders. And also the setbacks in C3 are very tight due to this small site. So it kind of worked out all around. The applicant was more than willing to go with that C2 zoning that staff suggested. They just came to us asking for commercial zoning. The applicant intends to build a small coffee shop. Again, that is the intention. However, of course, with annexation and zoning, anything that's allowed in the C2 district would potentially be allowed if this were annexed and zoned. So for future land use map, this is adjacent to suburban commercial. And then this is a current street view of the site. Again, based on surrounding land uses and the comprehensive plan future land use map, staff does recommend approval. Planning Commission will have a public hearing next Monday, October 17th. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
For the purpose of discussion, we'll entertain a motion to receive.
Second.
Floor is open for discussion. By show of hand, is the owner of the property or representative of the owner of the property with us this evening? Yes. Thank you. Are you available for questions?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. With that, floor is open for discussion.
Scott, I may have missed this somehow. Is this request somehow connected? I think it's the Jesus closet that's there, building right behind?
It is right behind it, but it is not connected.
Completely different.
No, sir. Not that I'm aware of. We could certainly ask the applicant, but not that I'm aware of.
It's Jesus Warehouse, and we have to be members there and attend there, but it is not related in any way legally.
Got it.
Yeah, so that is, that warehouse is right here
To the right.
in this picture.
Others? Ms. Cotty, what? So that's. What is that primary street there in front of it?
Arlington?
Arlington, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's really close to the intersection with Wade Hampton. We probably should have zoomed out a little bit, but Wade Hampton is just right down here. And so this is Arlington, and then this is the DMV.
So will the primary entrance then be off Sizemore?
So there is an actual entrance already. However, that would be determined during Planning Advisory Committee, and worked out with the encroachment permit with, DOT and/or the city.
Okay, thank you. Comments? Questions? Discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert, Mayor Danner.
Yes. Thank you, sir, for sticking it out tonight. We appreciate your time. Let's move to the first reading of ordinance number 64-2022. This is an ordinance authorizing the execution and delivery of a development agreement by and between the City of Greer, South Carolina, and Century Development Partners, LLC, or its assigns, with respect to capital improvements in the City of Greer and other matters related thereto. Ms. Gotti?
I apologize, I sat down too soon. So ordinance 64 is related to the annexations for 60, 61, and 62, the Streams development, the proposed apartment complex, RM2 annexation. And so it, again, is just the typical annexation fee that we require for residential projects for annexation, and again, based on a multifamily unit number rather than single family.
For the purpose of discussion, I'll entertain a motion to receive.
Second.
Floor is open for discussion. By show of hand, do the owner of the properties or the representative of the owner of the properties with us this evening? I just thought y'all were gluttons for punishment. Gonna stay here all night. I didn't realize you were up to bat in the 10th spot tonight. Floor is open for discussion. Are you available for questions if there are any?
Yes.
Thank you. Floor is open for discussion. Comments? Questions? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert, Mayor Danner.
Yes.
Okay, now.
Last item before us this evening is the first and final reading of resolution number 17-2022, a resolution approving the sale and transfer of city property. Since I don't see the chief here, I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Merriman.
I hope I'm still the chief.
Mr. Mayor, I was wrong again, sir. I did tell you the chief wasn't going to be here, but that's my fault.
Matt, you might need to.
I was just waiting for him to stand up.
Yeah. That's what I get for being at the end of the agenda.
It starts getting a little giddy about right now.
And he had his license on.
Chief, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Bring before you a proposed resolution for your consideration for approving the sale and transfer of city property. In 2020, March of 2020, the Greer PD bought a German Shepherd by the name of Ozzy and paired him up with a police officer named Hampton Knapp. And they were in service for approximately two years and 3 months. And Officer Hampton Knapp was hired by the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division this summer. And as part of that, his new employment arrangement, SLED wanted to purchase the dog as well, so that they could remain paired together and then continue to serve in their capacity with SLED. So we looked at our options internally, and that one of those was to see if we could keep the dog in service within our city, with our police department, and pair the dog up with another handler. And we did not have any interest internally for that, so our options kind of ran pretty thin quickly. Now, the State Law Enforcement Division has offered a price of $6,000 to purchase the dog, so that's sort of a prorated amount that's left from the value of what we purchased the dog for in 2020. So it's my recommendation that we accept that offer from SLED and
sell and transfer ownership of the K-9 to SLED. Now, there will be if this is approved, we will do an agreement with SLED that releases liability from the city, where SLED assumes responsibility and liability for Ozzy.
Council, this comes as a resolution. I'll entertain a motion to receive.
So moved.
And a second. Floor is open for discussion. Questions? Comments? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert,
Yes, I think
Mayor
it's great
Danner.
that they're gonna let the dog go with him.
I'm sorry.
I think it's great that they're gonna take the dog.
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council, with that, we do not have any items for executive session.